Hi, my name is Rachel from Straitjacket Podcast.
And I'm Keta Loren with Straitjacket Podcast. And today we are joined by our guest, HIlary. Hi, HIlary.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So HIlary has 13 years experience working in the recovery field and treatment centers as an operations manager, correct?
Yes.
And then has 14 years of recovery.
Yes.
And is kind of a pillar in the community. So we're really grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Of course. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey, younger life into your recovery.
Oh, well, it gets a bit messy, but started out, I actually grew up in Orange County, Southern Orange County in Lake Forest
you're a local.
area. Yeah. And I had the typical, cookie cutter neighborhood. I had a great childhood where my curfew was when the street lights went on and we played ding dong ditch with the kids in the neighborhood and toilet papered each other's houses and all went trick or treating together. I had a very traditional home that I grew up in where we all had dinner together at the dinner table. It was me, my dad, my mom, and my older sister. So we were a very close family. Summer vacations, the whole bit. What I didn't know was that my mom was an alcoholic. And come nighttime, around dinner time, a lot of the times my dad would get super angry and I didn't understand why.
Right.
I learned later on it was because she was drunk. I didn't know that as a kid. I was sheltered. My mother ended up getting sick when I was in 5th grade. She got breast cancer. And she was in remission for about a year and it came back and it eventually killed her. So by the time that I graduated 8th grade, I had lost my mom and I was always a straight A student. I was always in the GATE classes because I do well academically. After my mother passed, though, I found myself kind of lost.
Yeah.
So going into high school, 9th grade, I learned what it meant to ditch school. And I started ditching school and I started drinking and experimenting with different drugs. And didn't really get heavy into anything, actually, until after I graduated high school.
You're a little bit of a late bloomer there.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Of course, every time I drank, I was blacking out, throwing up. Like, I had no control over it. It wasn't like partying with my friends on the weekend and having fun. It was blackout drinking every time I drank and not remembering what happened.
Oh, man.
But I somehow made it through high school. And my dad met another woman and remarried. And the day that they left for their honeymoon, I picked up a razor and I cut myself. And I didn't realize or understand or know that I was struggling with depression. I hadn't grieved the loss of my mother. I didn't go to counseling, nothing like that. She was 14 when she died. I was 14, and then, fast forward to after graduating high school, I was 19 and I started cutting. So I was a very late bloomer with that because oftentimes with minors, the cutting comes a lot earlier.
Right, like prepubescent or, puberty, 11, 12, 13.
Yeah. So I managed with smoking weed and dabbling in different drugs and alcohol through high school, and that just wasn't working anymore. And so I discovered cutting. And once I started, I couldn't stop.
Was it a relief?
Yes.
Okay.
It was almost like I was like a boiling pot that I needed to release. Like when I explain it to people.
Cooker.
Yeah, when I explain it to people now, it's like I almost felt like a volcano that needed to erupt with the anxiety. And because I hadn't been to therapy and I didn't have any help to grieve, I didn't understand how to communicate what I was feeling.
Well, and it's like the person that would walk you through such a devastation would be your mom.
Yeah. Yeah, and my dad put his head in the sand and went to work. And he traveled for work. So oftentimes, like, my house was known as the party house throughout high school, and my dad was never there.
So it was unsupervised.
Unsupervised. My sister was 19. She was dealing with the loss of my mom. I'm 14. She's helping take care of me. So somehow I made it through, and I held my breath, and then I discovered cutting.
Yeah.
And I started cutting, and about 6 months later, my friends told my dad when I was actually at work, like, hey, like, your daughter's doing this to herself. Like, we're concerned.
Yeah.
And so he sent me to a therapist, which happened to be my stepmom's therapist. And I didn't like my stepmom.
Right.
Yeah.
So I didn't tell the therapist anything. I didn't trust him. I didn't like him because I didn't like her.
Yeah.
You know, and that was my first experience meeting with a therapist. I just lied about everything. So, of course, it didn't help.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
And
you
the
have to be
therapist
willing.
shouldn't have taken you either. She
Correct.
should have
Conflict of
referred you out.
interest.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
once I told him, like, hey, I smoke weed all the time and I drink every weekend, then he started accusing me of being high, like, during our sessions. And I'm like, you're an idiot. Like, you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
I don't want you to help me. So it didn't help,
Right.
you know. My dad, you know, was broken when he saw what I was doing to myself because I went 0 to 100. Like, I just
Like an overnight switch.
switch. I mean, the scars that I have on my body, you would think that I was a cutter for 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, luckily I'm in recovery from that as well. But I went 0 to 100 like I do most things. And the first time I went to treatment was actually for cutting.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous or NA or the 12 steps. I had no idea what any of that was. I was sent to a lockdown facility in Arizona because I asked for help. I knew that something was wrong.
Yeah.
I knew that what I was doing to my skin and my body was not normal.
Yeah.
And so I told my dad, like, hey, thanks for sending me to therapy, but it's not working. Like, I need to go somewhere and get help.
I need more help than
I need
this.
more help. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at first he started sending me to therapy twice a week instead of
Oh,
once
gosh.
a week. And I held on for like 6 months. And then I
That's still
eventually
longer
relapsed
than
in
you
my
think.
cutting.
Yeah.
Do you think it was hard for him to like grasp or accept, whether it's because of guilt or shame, but like in order to get you more help meant that you were more damaged than possibly he could deal with?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, he held a lot of guilt and shame because I started cutting around the time that he got remarried.
Yeah.
And so he felt like it was his fault that he did this to me.
yeah.
You know, and I didn't know how to explain that it wasn't his fault, that it was going to happen regardless of
Yeah.
At
where
some
he
point,
was in his personal relationships.
Right. But it definitely triggered it.
It definitely triggered it.
Yeah.
I mean, the day he left for his honeymoon is the day I cut for the first time. So he connected that, you know, and he felt bad for not knowing how to show up. Like, his way of providing for us was not emotionally.
Right.
It was with money. So as long as we had money, as long as we had everything that we needed, then he was doing what he needed to
job
do.
was
And then
done.
he realized that that wasn't enough
Right.
and that I needed more. So I went to a 30-day lockdown facility and I was introduced to like the 12 steps and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no idea what a sponsor was. I was around people who had been in treatment before.
Right.
You know, when I'm there thinking cutting is my only problem. I can't stop. I need help. My mom died. I'm super sad. I don't know how to communicate what I'm feeling. I know I'm in trouble.
Right.
So let me do this and I'll go home and just continue about my life. And everyone there was talking about aftercare. And I'm like, well, what is that? You know, and they're talking about sponsors. And I thought it was someone that bought you snowboards and like
Right.
gave you sticker, like sponsorship of like a sport, you know,
Right.
that's
Just
what I thought a
Wear
sponsor
their sticker
was.
on your shirt.
Yeah, I had no idea. So that was really my first experience into the program.
Were they doubling it? Like, because I know a lot of places will use like a 12-step program, but specifically for like Overeaters Anonymous or SLAA. Was it like that or was it AA?
It was dual diagnosed.
Okay.
Because the main reason I was there was for my depression. I did a lot of psychotherapy, a lot of different therapeutic EMDR, stuff like that.
So you had diagnoses at this point.
Yes.
And what were they?
That was the first time. It was depression and anxiety.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the first time I had really been in front of a professional,
Right.
who I was honest with, right? Because I wasn't honest with the therapist, so he didn't know what was actually going on with me. So that was the first time I had really been evaluated by professionals, put on medication like antidepressants, SSRIs, stuff like that.
Did they help right away, or was it an uphill battle finding something that would fix? I know that's what a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, I was
medication.
honestly so sick still that I
Yeah.
don't even remember if it
Right.
helped.
Right.
You know, because I needed to jump into the program of AA at that point, but I had no idea that I was addicted.
Okay.
That I was an alcoholic, that I needed the program. I thought, I have a problem with cutting. Once I get that under wraps, everything is fine.
Right.
Okay.
That was the only reason I was there.
Yeah.
Through Family Week there, and through learning from my peers, and they're going to aftercare, and they're all talking about Costa Mesa, California. Well, I'm in Arizona, and I'm like, dude, I live right there.
Right.
Like, I'll come see you when
Yeah.
you're in aftercare. Turn it around, and the professionals were like, you need to go to aftercare too. And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I'm here
Good.
getting the
Fixed.
therapy that I need
me.
to grieve,
Set me
and I
free.
can go home now.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a problem with drinking. I don't have a problem with drugs. Like, I'm not an alcoholic. Like, what?
Yeah.
Because alcohol was never really my first choice. I'm an awful person when it comes to drinking. The hangovers are awful. I suffer with migraines, and it just would make my headaches so bad that alcohol was never my first choice.
Right.
Well, I ended up going to aftercare.
Okay.
So I came out to Costa Mesa, and I started going to NA meetings and AA meetings and learning about the program, but I still wasn't fully convinced that
Right.
that's what I needed. I was kind of going along with what everyone else was telling me I needed, but I didn't believe it myself. So I got 9 months sober. I held on for 9 months. Didn't really work my steps. Meetings were more of like a social gathering to me.
Right.
You know, I was in treatment. So I had the therapist and I had the case manager, and I was still continuing to work on like my grief with my mother. And I wasn't convinced, you know, so I stayed sober. I moved out into an apartment with a girl I met in treatment. And one day I woke up and, my roommate had relapsed on alcohol and she left. So I'm in an apartment by myself, and I decide, well, I know all these people that are doing heroin.
Yeah.
You know, I've never done it before. Maybe I would like it.
Yeah.
And I happen to know one of my sister's old friends that she wasn't talking to anymore because he was on heroin. I
Right.
called him. And I went from smoking weed to shooting heroin in a 24-hour period.
You really are 0
I am
to
Yeah.
0 to
real
100.
quick.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's no
That's
in
not a
between for me.
typical
No,
escalation.
because I was definitely a late bloomer. And so anytime I dabbled in something, I just took it to the limit.
Yeah.
You know, and I hit my bottoms very quickly because of that. I remember doing heroin for the first time in that apartment. It made me very sick.
Yeah.
And I
do
said,
that.
let's do it again.
Right, and that's the thing is like anybody who does heroin for the first time, it makes you retch and heave and
Yes,
throw up.
it was
It's not a
awful.
positive experience, and for some reason, your brain is like, maybe if I do it again, the outcome will be different this time.
Yeah,
and like
maybe it'll be better and I'll like it.
how many times do you have to do it until it's like the first 4 times at least? Like you're having a miserable experience, and I think that's the difference between an addict and someone who's not. Is like someone who's not isn't looking for the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow with a terrible experience. You know what I mean?
I'm like, let's go further. It made me
Sucks.
super
Like,
sick.
these people keep saying it's good, so I'm going to trust them. I'm going to push
Yeah.
past this little part right here, and then
It's like, these eggs gave me food poisoning. Let me eat some more.
Right, exactly. It makes no sense whatsoever, and that's like the baffling part about an addictive personality, you know?
And I still, at that point, I mean, I almost missed out on my cousin's wedding. I was supposed to watch her child the day of the wedding, like early in the morning. I didn't show up because I'm shooting heroin in my apartment now.
Yeah.
So all the behaviors are coming out. Okay.
All the behaviors are coming out, but I still didn't get it.
Yeah.
I didn't get it. And it took me 4 more treatment centers to understand what it means when I raise my hand and I say I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah. What
What it means to have an addictive personality.
Yeah.
Where do you think the denial came from? Because all of the proof was there.
I don't know if it was denial. It was lack of knowledge.
Okay.
It was lack of, like I would always get a sponsor, but I never utilized my sponsor.
Right.
Right? So I never actually was willing and teachable.
Yeah.
I never worked my steps. I never really got into the book. Like I did really well when I was in treatment because I went to treatment 4 more times after that. But I always did great in a structured environment, but every time I left treatment, I wasn't working my steps and I relapsed and I would wonder why. And I really didn't know. I didn't understand that the step work is what was missing.
Right.
That like the core of the program that allows you to maintain sobriety, I didn't have that.
Yeah.
You know, I thought, well, I'm doing great while I'm in treatment. Like, why can't I stay sober outside of it?
Right.
You know, and then it wasn't until that last treatment center, like at this point, fast forward, 5 years, my friends are dying. My family's done with me. My dad dropped me off at Yellowstone and was like, if you leave, don't call me.
Yellowstone's a gnarly place to end up at, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, I mean, and in the
house on
treatment
the block.
centers I was at before were like super, bougie. They took me to get my nails
Yeah.
done and we got
Like, oh, this is
massages
nice.
and meetings were still social hour and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden I end up at Yellowstone and I'm detoxing and they're like, well, here, go clean the toilet.
Yep.
So I'm vomiting in the toilet as I'm cleaning it.
Oh gosh.
Because they don't do they didn't do medical detox
Yeah.
back then, so I detoxed cold turkey and I didn't realize that I had myself on this pedestal, because everything had always been handed to me. And so it wasn't hard. Like I didn't go to some of the depths that some people do in their recovery or in their addiction because everything was always handed to me. Right. So I would manipulate my dad when I was living at his house, like,
Right.
let's go get lunch. So I knew he would take a shower and leave his money on the counter and I could take his money when he was in the shower.
Right.
So it's like those ulterior motives were there. But yeah, it was very, very, very humbling to end up at a place like Yellowstone after going through the treatment centers that I had been. But it saved my life.
Do you think your dad had become educated at that point about what enabling is?
Yes, he had started going to Al-Anon finally because I wasn't staying sober. I even got a year sober one time. I remember taking my chip. I was working an NA program at the time and I was bawling my eyes out. I was fucking miserable. And I wasn't working my steps.
Yeah.
Like that was the whole thing. And it's like I could have saved 5 years of being a newcomer over and over again because I got stuck into this treatment cycle that a lot of people get stuck into is you go to treatment, you get out, you do well, maybe you get set up in an apartment or you go live at home with your family and then you relapse and you end up back in treatment.
Right.
It's like that revolving door. I did that for 5 years, which a lot of people do. If I would have taken what the women before me were saying and taken their advice and utilized a sponsor and worked my steps, I might have stayed sober.
Yeah.
But I do trust that everything worked out the way it was supposed to.
I always say if it could have happened any other way, it would have.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need those parts of your story, not only to help other people, but because they build your character up, So all that you have to offer the world today, maybe you wouldn't have those unless you had gone through the trenches because it taught you that humility and especially being kind of a high bottom is what we would call you, it kind of helped you get on the level of what a lot of addicts and alcoholics do experience, which is that low bottom, indigent, on the street, bottom of the barrel experience where
and I
you
never would
wouldn't
have
have had
pictured
insight.
myself there, but it saved my life ending
Right.
up there. And I wouldn't have ended up there if I didn't go to all those other treatment centers before.
So what changed at Yellowstone? So you're more humble.
A big part of it was that I had no plan because I had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So going through the other treatment centers, it's, a typical 30, 60, 90-day program.
Yeah.
They have it all set up for you. That's how treatment is still today. When I got to Yellowstone, it was open-ended.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, I'm going to be here for 30 days and then I'll do PHP, after residential and then I'll move into their sober living. They didn't have levels of care.
Right.
And I had nowhere to go.
Right.
I was kicked out of my dad's house. They changed the locks. They changed the alarm code. My sister hadn't been talking to me for almost a year. My extended family wanted nothing to do with me. So when I checked into Yellowstone and my dad said, if you leave, don't call me, like I really had nowhere to go. So it's either I'm going to leave and go sleep in a bush on the corner or I'm going to stay here. And it was very uncomfortable, but having no plan and no fallback, And it being open-ended taught me how to live one day at a time, which I had never done before because I always had everything was always planned out.
Yeah.
Everything was always planned out, and I knew what was going to happen next. But at Yellowstone, I had no idea what was going to happen to me. You know, every time I checked into treatment before, I really thought I wanted to get it. I really thought I wanted to be sober. When I checked in Yellowstone, I did not want to be sober. I was not done. All I knew was that I had tried recovery and it didn't work. And I had tried the loaded life and that wasn't working either.
Right.
I didn't know where I belonged. I thought about dying probably every day for the first 90 days of sobriety. Like,
And were
just
you cutting at that point too?
I think so, yes. My cutting
In
was in and
secret?
out because the heroin really solved a lot of my problems.
The pain
You
really
just
emerged.
numb
So
it.
when I was doing heroin, I wasn't cutting.
Yeah.
Like the only time I ever wasn't smoking weed is if I had enough heroin,
Yeah.
you know. And then I would resort back to smoking weed if I started detoxing and, you know, before I could pick up again, then I'd smoke weed to get me through until I could get high. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you think, how long were you at Yellowstone?
18 months.
That's such a long time to be in a treatment center, but they see
That's
really,
awesome.
they see a lot of success, Yellowstone, you know. I've seen a lot of people have long-term recovery come out of there, you know, straight out of prison, and that's, you know, the last house on the block for them. And then you see them with their testimonies and they've got 15 years sober and like they're a pillar in the community and they've overcome so much and accomplished so much. And it's just like a full turnaround. What's your opinion on what they do right and what you think some other treatment centers may get wrong?
I think a huge part of it, at least for me, because I can only speak for myself.
Correct.
A huge part of it for me was they didn't hold my hand and walk me through things. They kind of shoved me through the door and told me to figure it out.
Okay.
Right. So
Some
it was
self-reliance.
sink or swim,
Okay.
you know, and if you expressed that you didn't want to be there, they would help you pack your bags, you know, because the next person needed the bed.
Yeah.
So it taught me to be quiet and to listen and to say yes and okay. When somebody asks you to do something, you say yes and you say okay. You know, so it taught me about being willing, you know, and through that experience, it humbled me. And a lot of these treatment centers, you know, like there was no billing insurance.
Right.
Yeah.
When I was at Yellowstone.
So
There was no, oh, how's your insurance plan? Cool. We got 30 days of off for you for
Right.
residential. And
Right.
then, you know, it's kind of like, okay, well, she has really good insurance. So let's make sure we keep her.
And
Yeah,
they allow
let's make-
bad behavior because they want the check or they, you know,
Yeah.
they don't set them up for success in that way.
And it's like, I understand that part of working in treatment, you know, it's a part of it.
It's the underside of it. The-
Yeah, but Yellowstone didn't have
business.
that.
Right.
Right. My dad cut a check. I think it was $8,000 for 90 days of treatment, and then I ended up paying rent and sober living after that 3 months. And like, there was no level of care. There was no step down. There was where I was at the time. And am I ready to job search? Cool. Here's a bus pass. Make a sack lunch from the donated food from the grocery store.
Gnarly.
We'll see you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have a cell phone.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of kids these days, it's like, oh my God, you can't take my cell phone away. Like, I didn't have one for the first
Right.
year
Yeah.
because it got stolen before I got sober.
Yeah.
So I would call my sponsor from payphones. I would go into job interviews and give them an 800 callback number, which was the main line to the Yellowstone house. And I got a job.
Did they set you up with interviews at all or no?
No.
Okay.
No, they literally gave me $2 and said, go figure it out. Go find a job.
Wow.
I had never taken a bus before, right? Because I was handed everything.
Yeah.
So when I was 16 or 17, when I got my license, my dad bought me my first new car. You know, I was given everything. I had never taken a bus before. I had never walked anywhere. I never had to.
Yeah.
And I was at the point where I literally didn't have anything. And I had to find a job. I would go to the library and I'd put myself on a waiting list and wait 3 hours to get on a computer for 30 minutes. And and, you know, next to Airplane Park in Costa Mesa. It's not Airplane Park anymore. They like redid it and they redid the library. But back then it was just a bunch of homeless people. So I was hanging out on the grass with a bunch of homeless people, sun tanning while I'm waiting to use the computer.
I wonder how polarizing that must be to be handed everything and to still end up in a place where you have nothing, and like how that must feel, you know what I mean? To be like, oh shit, this is really my responsibility. Like I did this, you know? Yeah. Was that something you dealt with?
Oh yeah. Big part of it. I never imagined myself doing the things that I did there, but I mean, I was so broken by the time that I ended up at Yellowstone that I didn't know what else to do. Like I said, I didn't know where I belonged, you know, and because there was no plan and because I knew, like, this is it. Like, either I'm going to get it or I'm not. I don't necessarily want to be sober, but I don't have anywhere else to be right now. So this is what I'm going to do. Right. You know, and again, it takes me back to living in that one day at a time. I had never experienced that before. I was forced into it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because I had nowhere else to go. Yeah. It was like, okay, this is what they're telling me to do, so I might as well go do it. This is what my schedule looks like today. Right. And I was taking it one day at a time. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, I got a year sober. And it was, they talk about it in the book about like a fourth dimension. And I didn't really have a lot of aha moments when I started working with my sponsor and started working my steps. It wasn't like a huge relief when I did my fourth and my fifth step. Yeah. But like looking back on the first year of sobriety, like taking the bus, right? Getting a job with no phone. Like that was a fourth dimension for me because I'd never imagined myself getting that low and somehow still making it. Right. You know, like I was able to do more than I gave myself credit for, you know? And I mean, Yellowstone definitely smacked me off that pedestal I had myself on.
I think sometimes wealth and like privilege can disable you.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Like, you know, it takes the fight out of you.
Well, and I learned too, like, when I first got to Yellowstone, I had a sponsor and she took me through my fourth and my fifth step and we didn't go over my part. Oh. And I was like, I feel like there's something missing.
Yeah. That's like the biggest thing.
Yeah. I'm like, I've been around the rooms long enough knowing like, okay, I need to work my stuff. I knew what they were, you know, so I knew there was something missing even though I'd never done a fourth and fifth step. Right. So my house manager actually was like, you need to find a new sponsor. And I'm like, okay, so I fired that one. And then there was this chick that would come to the house every time we didn't do our chores or the girls weren't getting along or we were slacking off on things or late to groups. She would come in and toss the house like we were in prison. She would take all of our mattresses, all of our clothes, all of our bathroom shit and just throw it in the middle of the room. And then we had to spend the rest of the Sunday putting everything back. That chick scared me. And my house manager knew that and said, there's your new sponsor, and assigned me to her. And she's still my sponsor today. Wow. And, you know, for a long time, because I didn't have a phone, the only time you were allowed to use the phone was at the end of the day. They had a house phone and you could make one phone call and it was to my sponsor only. Now, normally, if something wasn't going my way, I would call my dad because he would tell me what I want to hear. And I had to call Kelly instead. And Kelly didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. She didn't give a shit about what I was feeling. All she wanted to know was what I did that day to stay sober. Right. That's it. Like, she didn't care if I did my chore. She's like, that doesn't count. I'm like, oh, well, I turned in job applications. So what? What did you do today to stay sober? That's all she ever asked me every day when I checked in with her. And eventually I started to catch on that every day I have to wake up and build a defense against the next drink. And she took me through the book and she took me through my steps and she broke down the book for me. Because I mean, the book was written a long time ago. Right. It's hard to understand. I didn't know what the fuck I was reading. Like we would do like big book meetings and this big family, the book house would come in and they would break down these paragraphs. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Like, how do they know that that's what that says? But my sponsor took me through the book and broke it down for me. So I understood what I was reading. And then I realized that I actually related to it no matter how long ago it was written. And that no matter where I was in my sobriety or what was going on in my life, there's something that I can reference back to in that book, and it lines up with it.
And it's usually just what you need to hear. Like you'll walk into a book study or something and you'll be going through something and the page that they land on will be exactly what you're dealing with or going through at that time.
Yeah.
Like it correlates so, it aligns so perfectly.
Yeah, and I actually, I mean, I don't know if I'm a big book thumper, but I love the way that it was written.
Yeah.
And I love the sarcasm in it, you know, and I understand the sense of humor and the way that they reference things, and it kind of jumps around, and I just appreciate it, you know, in a different way because my sponsor sat me down and took me through it.
Yeah.
You know, so I understand it in a different way now. After working my steps the first time through, it was time to work them again.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a lot easier the second time around.
Right.
You know, because you get through like the backpack full of rocks you've been carrying around for, I mean, I was 24 at the time. So I had, you know, my sex inventory, my wrongdoings, my resentments. It's a big book.
Yeah.
You know, it was a book. And, you know, it's like now I'm on my 4th step again at 14 years sober, and there's maybe 3 resentments.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, and like, what, my sex inventory has my husband on it?
Yeah.
Like, that's it, you know? So it definitely changes, but the steps are something that will always be in my life now. I talk to my sponsor probably twice a day,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
if not more. She's someone that I want to call.
Yeah.
You know, she's someone that I'm drawn to, and it's an automatic. And I don't call her so she can tell me what I want to hear.
Yeah.
I'll call her and be like, hey, I was just a dick to Robert. What's my part?
Yeah.
Or how should I have done it differently? Because I already know I'm in the wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I can be a brat. I know it. I know what my character defects are just
You're not
because I know
expected
what
to
they
be
are.
perfect, you know?
Yeah, and just because I know what they are doesn't mean that they're ever going to go away. I'm just aware of them, so I can choose to make changes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you still talk to her as much.
Yeah. Well, the last 6 months have been very difficult for me, and this last year's probably been the hardest year in recovery so far. Like, I thought the first year was hard until I hit this last probably 6 or 8 months.
I think that's the hardest thing about recovery is, you know, we want to believe that we take away the drugs and alcohol, we treat the mental health issues, and then everything's just going to be sunshine and glory. But life is a full spectrum experience.
Yeah.
And you're going to experience misery. You're going to experience depression. You're going to experience joy, friendship, betrayal, love. You're going to experience every single thread of the spectrum
Yeah.
while you're sober. Being sober doesn't take away from the fact that you're a human being.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what a lot of people have a problem conceding to, and why relapse occurs, you know, because they experience life
Yeah.
at its worst, and they're like, I didn't sign up for this. And it's like, well, you're a human. So
Yeah.
that's
You still got to deal with it.
That's the deal, you know. How have you dealt with this last year and maintained your recovery? What has been like the stronghold that you've stuck to that's kept you like fortitude?
I mean, there's some days where I just hold my breath, you know, and there are some days that I take action, you know, like I reached out to my sponsor and, you know, told her, like, so my father passed away 6 months ago, and I always told my sponsor, hey, look, when my mom died, I got loaded for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? So when my dad dies, I'm getting high.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, but there's no way around
You have
it.
that
I
reservation.
cannot understand or fathom living in a world that he is not in. He has been my Mr. Mom. He has been my rock. He has been everything to me my entire life.
Right.
You know, like, I was a mama's girl until I was forced to be a daddy's girl.
Yeah.
And then we had a very special relationship. And he quite literally was the last man standing. Dropped me off at Yellowstone. He was the only person that was still willing to talk to me. And he passed away in August of last year. And I always said, I'm going to get high. I'm going to get loaded, you know, and he was on hospice care. So I go in the fridge and there's fentanyl patches. And I'm like, oh shit. So what do? I FaceTime my sponsor.
Yeah.
It's just automatic at that point. Like, and I think that things happen when they happen for a reason. Like my higher power, I'm not like a big God person. I don't like to identify with religion. I'm more spiritual.
Yeah.
So my higher power, whatever the fuck that may be, because it changes as I go along in life. My higher power like worked through me, and I FaceTimed Kelly. And I show her. I'm like, there's fentanyl patches in the fridge right now. Like, I really want to take one.
Yeah.
She's like, don't you fucking dare. You know? And I think the fact that my dad took his last breath and I didn't know it. It scared the shit out of me because it was a big gasp. And then he took one more, and I promised him I would stay sober. And I think that the blessing of being able to say that to him, hoping and knowing that he could hear me, that I wasn't going to revert back to what I had put him through, that I was going to be okay. It was almost like I set myself up for a promise that I needed to keep. You know, and that's why, like, I mean, before my dad really got sick and got put on hospice, I would talk to my sponsor maybe 2-3 times a week. But right now with grieving and what I'm going through, like, I know better than that. And I need to be in constant communication with her. It's like the umbilical cord is reattached. You know, and I reattached it knowing like I need to keep my shit together. And I think, so she started me through the book again, and we read the first 164 pages. Back to basics. And that's all I was doing, is as long as I don't pick up, if that's the only thing I do today, then that's okay. And there are some days where my depression is so deep that I can't get out of bed. There are days where I feel okay. You know, I have self-awareness to the point where, like, when I was back at Yellowstone, they weren't very supportive of taking medication. And I got off everything. I got off all my meds that I was on, and at 18 months sober, I had caused some harm to somebody I was in a relationship with, and it was the first time I had really seen and felt what it's like to cause harm to someone else being sober. My answer to that was cutting. And I called my sponsor and I told her, and she said, that's not a normal reaction. You're already working a very strong program. You need to seek outside help. And I went back to a psychiatrist, and I accepted that there is something wrong with my chemistry. And I got put back on meds. When I was 13 years sober, I thought, you know what? If I ever want to have children, I can't be on the medication I was on. It was Paxil. It's not safe to be on during pregnancy. And I had gotten married, you know, so I was like, who knows if we want to have kids or not. I'm not even there yet. But just the thought of it, I was like, maybe I should switch my meds. And I'm like, you know what? It's been 13 years. Like, I know how to manage my life and handle stress and walk through things. And maybe I want to know what my baseline is. So I got off of medication again under a doctor's order this time. Always went under a doctor's order. And, you know, actually spoke with my doctor and said, I'd like to identify what my baseline is. And then I went back to therapy because I was like, I need to talk to a professional about when do I identify if I need medication or not. But I didn't want to talk to a professional like a psychiatrist because their job is to prescribe medication. So it's who can I talk to? So I went back to my therapist and saw her for about 3 months, and she said, let's give it 90 days. That's how long it would take for the medication to fully be out of your system, for you to identify what your baseline is. Because what if I don't need the medication anymore? Obviously, that would be my hope. It's easier. At the end of that 90 days, there was a dark cloud over my head every day. I mean, we took a trip to Hawaii with my family, and I wasn't as excited as I normally would be. I didn't feel joy in everyday things. I didn't look forward to anything, no matter what was happening. I know myself well enough. I got back on medication. You know, so I talked with my therapist, and I said, I believe that the depression is still there. I know that the anxiety is because I also have OCD, and I was cleaning my house like crazy, trying to get my anxiety down, and nothing was helping. you know, and then I'm up all night, and, you know, the insomnia comes with the depression and the anxiety, and then the OCD, and it's like I need to vacuum my entire apartment at 10:30 at night because I
get
think
more
that's going to help
control.
me
Right.
get a better night's sleep.
Yeah.
That's
You
a
know?
good, is it like a
Yeah.
control thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Trying to find the magic lever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even
That's what it's kinda
now,
like.
like going through the last 6 months, like I'll be like, my house is a mess. It's so dirty. Anyone else who walks in is like, dude, your house is spot. Like, there's literally nothing out of place. There's
Yeah.
nothing out.
Yeah.
Everything is put away. My bed is made, but it's like I'm vacuuming every day. I'm mopping every day. I'm dusting every other day. And as long as it's not getting in the way of like life appointments or like visiting friends and stuff like that, then I allow myself to do it, but not to like an obsessive point, you know?
Yeah.
And I just check in with my sponsor, you know?
Yeah.
And I
If
was
it's
like,
not harming you.
it's not harming me. I'm not staying home to clean my house and canceling plans with friends or not
Right.
coming to a podcast.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, but yeah, some days are harder than others, and I think it's something greater than myself working in my life.
Most definitely.
You know, and self-talk that helps.
Yeah.
Of
And
like, I am gonna be
experience.
okay.
I think that, you know, one thing that you have after years of having a condition is experience and knowing what works, what doesn't. Like, nobody knows you like you know you.
Yeah.
And so you know when it's getting unhealthy. You know when it's, you know, riding the line. You know, like, this is okay. Like, this amount, like, this is manageable and not affecting me in a negative way. And then if it jumps off the deep end, you know how to ask for help.
Yeah.
And you have people to help you. You have that support system set up already. And I think that's what a lot of people who struggle with mental health issues lack, you know?
Yeah,
is that
and I
support
feel
system.
like the humility's still there because you were able to reach out.
Yeah.
And like you weren't like, oh, I've had 13 years or 14 years, so I don't need this as much.
Oh no, I'd never believe that I have it in the bag.
That's-
I'm
yeah.
still
That's a
very
good
much
thing.
a human being, and
Yeah.
I make mistakes, and it's, you know, I know the difference between isolation and relaxation. You know, because if I'm isolating at home, I'm anxious while I'm doing it.
Yep.
And if I'm just relaxing because I'm tired, I'm not anxious.
That's a really good point.
You know what I mean? And it's like, I know over the last 14 years, I know myself so well that I know when I'm pushing the envelope. There are some days when I allow myself to stay home and to cry and to sleep because I am grieving.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I am going through struggles I've never experienced before. So I allow myself the time to do that. And it's like, okay, I'm going to let myself isolate just for today. And then tomorrow I need to make
Back to
plans.
it. Yep.
Yeah.
You know, and I call my sister, you know, because I haven't been working, and it's like, oh, do the boys need to be, my nephews, do they need to be picked up from school tomorrow? I'll be there at 2:30.
Yeah.
And I make plans where I'm accountable to somebody else, because if I don't, I will isolate the next day too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I know myself. So it's do that contrary action.
It's so simple, but it's genius, you know, keeping tabs on it. And you have to keep tabs on it because it'll get away from you.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's the
And then
literal-
you can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
right. Because it's kind of like a snowball effect. Like, if you let it go on longer and longer and longer, it's that much harder to pull yourself out of it.
Yeah.
So if you need that something that's going to interject, that's going to like cut off the momentum in that direction, you know, that's a really great point. Yeah.
So what would you think is like the best advice you can give to other people about mental health or recovery or your experiences?
I mean, first things first, and my husband was part of it. If you struggle with mental health, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. Like, your chemistry may be off, but it's not a bad thing to take medication to help yourself.
Yeah.
Because I had to accept that, you know, last year when I realized that I needed to go back on medication. You know, is that there's nothing wrong with me. I just need some help.
Right.
There might be some wires crossed. And I would rather live in a world where I look forward to my days than not.
Right.
You know, so when it comes to mental health, like, it's the stigma around it or it being a bad thing that you're on medication. It's not a bad thing. You're just trying to help yourself and being
Right.
responsible enough and having enough respect for yourself to take medication.
Yep.
And be responsible in taking it every day, to allow yourself to be happy. is not a bad thing. And when it comes to recovery, like if you end up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or any program out there, or if you end up in treatment, it didn't happen by accident. People don't randomly just end up in the rooms.
Right.
So you're going to do it now or you're going to do it later.
There's no escaping it.
There's no escaping it.
True.
There literally isn't. Like, you do it now. It's like I could have done it when I was 19, and by the time I was 24, I finally did it.
Yeah.
But it's you do it now or you do it later, and if you're uncomfortable, welcome.
Welcome.
It's not supposed to be comfortable. It's against our nature.
Yeah.
We don't like discomfort. That's why we do the things that we do. Or I think that's the reason why we use is we're trying to escape feeling and feeling anything, to be honest, you know. So, well, what a wonderful conversation. We just want to thank you for being here today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. It was a wonderful, experience. And that's it for this episode of Straitjacket Podcast. And we will see you next time.